Ken, were you drafted? Or
I was drafted.
in what year was you drafted in?
I was drafted in 1943.
Into the Army Air Corps, or what?
I was drafted and sent to Fort Snelling, and then I was sent to Mineral Wells, Texas, Camp Walters, Texas, for infantry. It was our infantry replacement training center, and I was sent there for infantry basic.
When you left there, where'd you go next?
While I was there, I took several tests. I qualified for OCS, which in those days they called them 90-day wonders.
Yes,
you could go to officers training school 90 days and you come out a second lieutenant. Or they had openings then in the Aviation cadet program in the Army Air Corps. And I made the application for that too and qualified. And that's what I was assigned to. And after I finished my infantry basic, came out orders sending me to Miami Beach, Florida for Air Corps basic training. Well, we had more basic training than they ever thought of giving in the Air Corps, so we just laid around for a couple of weeks, went swimming, and then they took my group, put us on a troop train, and sent us all the way up the East Coast to up within 30 miles of the Canadian border to Burlington, Vermont, to attend the University of Vermont. That was our first assignment in the Air Force. We went to the University of Vermont and took several courses. And while we were there, we got to fly 10 hours in a Piper Cub to see if you were adapted to flying. And when we finished our training there, we were shipped to a classification center in Nashville, Tennessee. We took a bunch of tests. Most of my unit was made up of former infantrymen, and they gave us this test to see if we were to go to pilot training, navigator training, or bombardier training. They gave us more tests, and they took about 50% of them and eliminated them and sent them back to the infantry. A friend of mine who was from Owatonna down here, they called it washed out when you were eliminated, but then they called him back and sent him to navigator school. So he went to navigation school and was assigned to a B-24 base in Italy. But I was assigned then went to what they call pre-flight school, and then went to primary training. And that's where we soloed, and that was just what it said. It was primary training. That was your first step.
What kind of plane did you fly in?
That was a PT-19, open cockpit. Didn't have any radio equipment in it. It had what they call a Gosport. We had helmets, and there was a Y that came from your helmet to a hose with a funnel on it. The instructor sat and he talked into that funnel. You could hear what he said. You couldn't talk back. And it never happened to me, but some of the guys said if the instructor didn't like what you done, he'd stick that funnel out in the slipstream and your ears would
pop.
Yeah.
I remember the Gosport too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I've seen one.
Anyway, that's and then we were sent to Greenville, Mississippi for basic flight training, and we were a special class. Normally, they went to BT-13s, that was a single engine, and you would get 50 hours in that or something. But we were assigned to twin engines for basic training. And we went to UC-78s or AT-17s, they called them. And we flew that in basic training. And when we completed that, well then they were, the program was kind of logged up, and they delayed the whole program for 5 weeks. And they sent us to Greenville, Mississippi for 5 weeks, and we worked on the line. I got a little ahead of myself. That was before we went to primary training. So I was stationed at Greenville, Mississippi twice. But after I'd finished basic training, then we were sent to advanced training. That was for twin engine training too. And that was at Blytheville, Arkansas. And that's where I graduated. I got my wings and my commission. Now our class, when we graduated, some of us made second lieutenant and some of them made flight officer. The guys used to call it the blue pickle. It's a warrant officer bar. They had all the privileges of a commissioned officer, but they were really warrant officers. They were flight officers called them. And but we graduated from multi-engine school 1st of February of 1945. So it took me almost 2 years. I went in March 43 and I graduated from pilot training 1st of February of 45. So nearly 2 years I was in training and to get my wings and commission.
So when you got all your training done, did you leave the country at that point?
No. Normally, we were shipped to Lincoln, Nebraska after we graduated, and there you would have been assigned to either B-24s or B-17 transition, getting ready to go overseas. But the war in Europe had ended, and things were kind of dragging a little bit. They were getting ready to invade Japan, and so we just laid around. In fact, we would report at 8 o'clock in the morning, and there was no orders for us. We were off. Some of us go to Omaha or anywhere we want to do, just so we'd be back by 8 o'clock next morning. But we laid around, and finally, orders came out. They were getting ready for the invasion of Japan, and they had 13,000 gliders they produced, and they only had 6,000 pilots. And they were going to use them extensively in the invasion of Japan. So they took my whole pilot class and sent us to Laurinburg Max in North Carolina. And then they gave us an additional 5 weeks of airborne infantry training, because some of them hadn't had any infantry training. So then I got a double dose of that. And then we started flying the gliders. Now the glider was set up, they were towed by the Bemidji 4A. They were 83-foot wingspan. They were 48 feet long. They could carry 13 fully equipped infantrymen. They carried a Jeep or a Jeep trailer. And when we were flying them, learning to fly them, to land them, they were full of sandbags. So they had the same load at all times, because your glide ratio would be different if you were empty or loaded. So now the CG-4A could land, and all they needed was a 600-foot landing strip. And a C-47 would tow 2 gliders. They were towed by a nylon tow rope. One rope was longer than the other. So they'd start off down the runway, and the gliders would take off first, and one would be in front of the other because one rope was shorter. And we never got over 400 feet. In combat, they found out that flying at 400 feet, they could go over the ground fast enough so the small arms fire didn't affect them, and the anti-aircraft fire wouldn't affect that altitude at all. So we never got over 400 feet. We had to always wear a parachute. All we used them for was cushions because they wouldn't done us any good with 400 feet to bail out. But we would take off, cut loose, come in and land. As soon as we landed, they'd come with a tractor tug, they called them. Hook on, tow you up to the flight line, hook up 2 more gliders, or take off, and that's all we did till we got our flight time in. And they were set up so they could, once you landed, normally you had to fight with the infantry until you could get back to your home base again. I think I took that picture.
Oh, okay.
Notice they had, when they parked them, they had to put spoilers on the leading edge of the wing. Now they had a real, the wing on them had an awful lot of lift. They would carry a big load. They weren't a high-speed wing, but they were they would carry a big load. So when they parked them, they had to put spoilers on the wing so that when the wind blew, they wouldn't lift the glider
Right.
off the ground.
They still do that today?
When you cut loose, you always came in high because you didn't have any, you couldn't pull up and go around if you didn't make the landing. And so you came in high, and you'd pull the spoilers, and that would open these spoilers on the leading edge of the wing, and you'd kick it into what they called a full slip. You give it full aileron, full rudder, and turn this on kind of sideways, and the thing would go just about straight down. And that's how you land them. As soon as you landed them, they had skids on the nose. You tip the tail up, and it'd skid along. You got on the brakes, and it would skid on these skids on the nose, and then as soon as you got slowed down, the tail would drop back down. And to get the equipment out of there, you could release the nose, and it was a hinge, so you could just push it up, and you could drive a Jeep or whatever you wanted right out the front of them. So, but I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, did you ever get out of the States?
No, I didn't, and that wasn't my fault. I mean, I would have just liked to have gone overseas, but it took me 2 years, you might say, to complete my training.
So when the war ended in Japan, where were you then?
When they dropped the bomb,
Yeah.
I was just finishing my glider training. I would have been getting ready to go to Japan. And then we just, everything stood still. We sat around for about, I don't know, a couple of weeks. And they gave us an option. They were organizing a C-119 squadron to send to Japan. They said, you can join this squadron, C-119s, and go to Japan for the Army of Occupation, or you can go home. So I said, the hell with it, I'll go home. Well, then I got to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, and first lieutenant gave me a sales pitch of staying in the reserves. So I signed up for the reserves and sent me home, gave me a separation. It wasn't discharged because I was assigned to the Air Force it wasn't Air Force, it was still the Army Air Corps then,
Right.
reserves. So then the Korean War came along, and I thought I'd probably get called up. But at that time, they had hundreds of pilots with hundreds of hours, and I only had about 500 hours. So I never got called up during the Korean conflict. But then, after I graduated high school in 1940, and that summer I took some mechanic courses, auto mechanics and so on. I took 3 different courses, I think, and then did little odd jobs and stuff till I was drafted. So when I went in the service, then I was still on flying status, so I'd have to go to Minneapolis, old Chamberlain then it's called, and once a month go down for a weekend and fly. And then for a while, then they got in a bunch of T-6s. They were the single engine fighter pilot advanced trainer, and flew them up there, and then we flew out of Bemidji and got our time. But that got to be kind of a hassle, the weekend over the cities and back. So then I made application to be relieved of flying status, and I became a supply officer. But because of my mechanic training and so on that I had, I ended up, I was a vehicle maintenance officer. That's what I put my time in as. In fact, my last tour before I retired, I served over at Duluth Air Force Base as a vehicle maintenance officer over there.